What's going on, you guys? This is Luke with Dark Fiction Factory. Today we are taking a look at one of my favorite all-time authors, Charles Bukowski. If you're not familiar with Charles Bukowski, this is a short video dedicated to giving you a little bit of information. There's countless more things to learn, but we're going to try to cram in as much as we can in this short amount of time. Bukowski writes very similar to my favorite author of all time, who is Easton Ellis of American Psycho and Less Than Zero, where much like Easton Ellis, Bukowski writes in a very transgressive but brutally honest style that also involves a lot of darkly comic humor. It usually involves a lot of alcohol, a lot of sex, a lot of drugs, and it usually would piss off people who were easily offended. But whereas Easton Ellis wrote about the privileged, high-class, rich society, Bukowski writes more about the underbelly, the everyday man, the guy in the gutter, the guy on Skid Row. So Bukowski was a German immigrant who suffered a rough and abusive childhood, living through the Great Depression, turned away from the draft so he never had to go to World War II. He bounced from state to state, from odd job, and woman to woman. Bukowski was an unapologetic alcoholic to the end. Bukowski barely slept, using his precious hours to write and drink, which is very much reflected in his work. And I think I really relate to Bukowski because as someone who definitely drinks too much, and I tend to really enjoy drinking while I'm writing, it's really fascinating to read what is almost like the memoir of a man who spent his whole life working these shitty, dirty jobs, and at age 55 finally broke through and published. So as someone who's creeping up on 40 myself, it really gives me hope that if I stick with this, that maybe I can actually break through at some point. It's never too late. And I think that's a very important message that you can learn from his life. He's sort of like my spirit animal, you might say. It's really fascinating to see how someone like Bukowski is able to take all those sort of negative adventures, if you will, negative experiences of his life, and turn them into really compelling fiction. He created the character of Henry Chanski as a first-person narrator. So his books have a sort of semi-autobiographical nature to them, where you know he's writing about his real life, but also he's using this fictional character, so he's able to embellish and take some liberties, so it's not a straight autobiography. Charles Bukowski is also the main reason I got into writing poetry and not only short stories. I never really looked at poetry as something that I wanted to pursue or really wanted to do. But after reading some of Bukowski's poetry and hearing him talk about poetry, it really got me involved. And Bukowski wrote a ridiculous amount of poetry. I mean, there's collection after collection. He probably wrote like thousands of poems in his life. But he really prided himself on not being your stereotypical pretentious poet. He once said in an interview, quote, "I mean, the great poets of the past, I've read their stuff, I've read it. All I get is a goddamn headache and boredom. I really feel sickness in the pit of my stomach. I say, there's some trick going on here. This is not true. This is not real. It's not good." He said the reason poetry isn't appreciated is that it hasn't, quote, shown any guts, shown any dance, or shown any moxie. And honestly, I can't say I disagree with him. You know, I respect the craft, but I get bored by old poetry too. So Bukowski came along and showed that poetry can be something dirty and grimy and exciting, and I really connected to that. Bukowski died of leukemia in 1994, a cult hero and a rock and roll poet and author, the likes of which this world has really never seen. If you're a fan of transgressive writing that really revels in drunken debauchery and misery, while also offering this odd sense of hope, then really check out Charles Bukowski. Thank you guys so much for watching. For more content, check out more here on our Dark Fiction Factory YouTube, as well as darkfictionfactory.com.